Once upon a time, there was a cheerful family called the Parkers. They lived in a cozy house in a small town. The family included Mr. and Mrs. Parker, their twin children, Jack and Jill, and their mischievous cat, Shadow. One sunny morning, while they were having breakfast, Mr. Parker said, "How about we get a puppy?" The twins' eyes sparkled with excitement. "Yes, yes, a puppy!" they shouted, jumping up and down. Even Shadow seemed curious, though he pretended not to care. Mrs. Parker smiled and said, "Well, if we all agree, let's visit the animal shelter today and find our new family member." The Parker family arrived at the animal shelter, which was filled with happy barks and wagging tails. A friendly lady named Miss Lily greeted them. "Welcome! Are you looking to adopt a pet today?" "Yes," said Mrs. Parker. "We want to adopt a puppy." Miss Lily led them to the puppy section. There were so many puppies, big ones, small ones, fluffy ones, and even some with funny spots. Jack and Jill couldn't decide which one they liked best. "Look at this one." Jack pointed to a brown puppy with big ears. The puppy wagged its tail so hard it fell over. "And this one." Jill pointed to a tiny white puppy that was trying to climb out of its bed. Mr. Parker laughed. "Why don't we meet them and see which one fits our family best?" Miss Lily brought the puppies to a playroom where the Parkers could interact with them. The brown puppy with big ears was named Rocky. He was full of energy, running around and licking everyone. The white puppy was named Daisy. She was sweet and loved to cuddle. Jack and Jill played with both puppies, but they still couldn't decide. "They're both so cute," said Jill. Mrs. Parker had an idea. "Let's see how they get along with Shadow. He's a part of our family too." They brought Shadow into the playroom. He looked around with his usual air of superiority. Rocky ran up to him and tried to lick his face. Shadow jumped back, his tail puffing up like a bottle brush. Daisy, on the other hand, approached Shadow slowly and gently sniffed his nose. Shadow didn't seem to mind Daisy as much. He even gave her a tiny, curious meow. "I think Shadow likes Daisy," said Mr. Parker. "But Rocky is so funny," Jack protested. Mrs. Parker suggested, "Why don't we let both puppies stay with us for a day and see who fits better?" The Parkers took both Rocky and Daisy home for a trial day. The house was filled with chaos and laughter. Rocky chewed on everything he could find, including Mr. Parker's slippers, Jack's homework, and even Shadow's tail. Shadow wasn't happy about that and climbed up the curtains to escape. Daisy, on the other hand, followed Jill around, snuggling in her lap and giving her little puppy kisses. She also loved playing with Jack, but she was careful not to disturb Shadow. By the end of the day, the Parkers were exhausted but happy. They gathered in the living room to discuss their decision. Mr. Parker said, "Rocky is fun, but he might be too much for Shadow and our house." Mrs. Parker agreed. "Daisy seems to fit in better with all of us." Jack and Jill nodded, though they looked a bit sad about Rocky. "Daisy is the one," they said together. The next day, they returned to the shelter. Miss Lily smiled when she saw them. "Have you made a decision?" "Yes," said Mrs. Parker. "We would like to adopt Daisy." Daisy wagged her tail and licked everyone's faces when they signed the adoption papers. Shadow watched from a safe distance but seemed to accept Daisy as part of the family. Back at home, they set up a cozy bed for Daisy and gave her toys to play with. Daisy quickly made herself at home, following Jack and Jill everywhere, playing with her new toys, and even sharing a quiet moment with Shadow. The first night with Daisy was a mix of excitement and a few surprises. Daisy had never slept in a new home before, so she was a little nervous. She whimpered softly, and Jack and Jill took turns comforting her. Mrs. Parker brought Daisy's bed into the twins' room, hoping it would help her feel safe. Shadow, curious as ever, peeked into the twins' room to check on Daisy. He watched from the doorway, his green eyes glowing in the dim light. Slowly, he padded over to Daisy's bed and gave her a gentle nudge with his nose. Daisy wagged her tail and licked Shadow's paw. It was a small gesture, but it seemed to calm her down. The next day, Daisy was ready to explore her new home. She followed Jack and Jill everywhere, her tiny paws pattering on the wooden floor. In the kitchen, Daisy discovered the joy of chasing her reflection in the shiny refrigerator door. She barked at it, then tilted her head in confusion when the other puppy barked back. In the garden, Daisy found a new friend, a butterfly. She jumped and twirled, trying to catch it, but the butterfly always stayed just out of reach. Jack and Jill laughed as they watched Daisy's playful antics. Shadow kept a close eye on Daisy from his favourite perch on the windowsill. He seemed to be warming up to her, even allowing her to share his sunny spot on the floor. Training a puppy is no easy task, and the Parkers quickly learned that Daisy was no exception. Mr. Parker took on the challenge of teaching Daisy basic commands like sit and stay. Armed with treats and a lot of patience, he began Daisy's training sessions in the backyard. "Sit, Daisy," Mr. Parker said, holding a treat above her head. Daisy looked at him with big, curious eyes and then plopped down on her hind legs. "Good girl," Mr. Parker praised, giving her the treat. "Stay," he commanded next, but as soon as he took a step back, Daisy jumped up and ran to him. It took several tries, but eventually, Daisy began to understand what stay meant. Jack and Jill helped too. They created a chart to track Daisy's progress and rewarded her with stickers for every new trick she learned. Shadow, of course, watched with mild interest, probably thinking he was far too sophisticated for such activities. A week later, it was time for Daisy's first visit to the vet. Mrs. Parker made an appointment with Dr. Green, the local veterinarian. Jack and Jill insisted on coming along to support Daisy. At the vet's office, Daisy was a little nervous. She whimpered and tried to hide behind Jack's legs. Dr. Green was very gentle and gave Daisy a thorough checkup. "She's a healthy little pup," Dr. Green said with a smile. "Just make sure she gets her vaccinations and regular checkups." Jill held Daisy's paw during the vaccination. "You're so brave, Daisy," she whispered. Daisy licked Jill's face, making her giggle. Over the next few weeks, Daisy and Shadow's friendship grew stronger. They began to play together, chasing each other around the house. Shadow would dart under the furniture, and Daisy would try to follow, often getting stuck halfway. Mrs. Parker had to rescue her more than once. One evening, Mr. Parker noticed Shadow grooming Daisy, licking her fur with gentle strokes. "Look at that," he said to Mrs. Parker. "I think Shadow has finally accepted Daisy." Mrs. Parker smiled. "I knew they would become friends eventually." One of the funniest moments for the Parkers was Daisy's first bath. Daisy loved to roll in the garden, and one day she came back covered in mud. "I think it's bath time," Mrs. Parker said, laughing. They filled the bathtub with warm water and gently placed Daisy inside. At first, Daisy was unsure, but soon she started splashing around, creating a mess. Jack and Jill were soaked, and even Shadow got a few water droplets on his fur. After her bath, Daisy looked like a fluffy cotton ball. Jack and Jill couldn't stop laughing. "You're the cutest puppy ever, Daisy," Jack said, wrapping her in a towel. As the days turned into weeks, Daisy became an integral part of the Parker family. She had her own bed, toys, and a special place in everyone's hearts. Shadow and Daisy's bond grew stronger, and they were often found cuddling together. The Parkers couldn't imagine their lives without Daisy. She brought so much joy, laughter, and love into their home. And as for Rocky, he found a wonderful home with another family who had lots of kids and a big yard where he could run and play all day. And so, the Parkers lived happily ever after with their new puppy, Daisy, who was truly the perfect fit for their family.